Kazuha is a 5-star animo unit that fulfills multiple roles as a grouper, buffer, and enabler all wrapped into one. If you're on the fence about pulling him, you should know what you're getting into before you spend your wishes. Before You Wish is a video series dedicated to noting good, bad, and ugly of characters in Genshin Impact. Many aspects of a unit are not apparent to the average Genshin player, even after playing them in the trials, due to the inaccurate testing environment that can make characters seem better than they truly are. Explicitly noting the pros and cons of these characters in full detail should inform you about how to push them to their highest potential and what it costs to do so. As always, if you enjoy a character for reasons like their voice actor, aesthetic, or personality, these videos are by no means meant to stop you from spending your Primo Gems on them. Instead, they should prepare you for the type of problems that you'll need to solve or work around to meet your gameplay expectations. With our introduction and disclaimers out of the way, let's get started. Kazuha is a complicated character, and understanding his kit is a necessity for players to reach his full gameplay potential. Kazuha's normal attack talent is Garyu Blade Work, which notably has the same plunge talent multipliers as Xiao. Kazuha's elemental skill, Chihayapuru, launches him up vertically, dealing animo damage and pulling enemies inwards, similar to Sucrose's elemental skill. While in the air, Kazuha can initiate a special plunge attack called Midare Ranzan that deals animo damage and additional elemental damage based on what the skill infuses. When this plunge hits the ground, an animo vortex will spawn, dealing no damage but keeping enemies grouped. Kazuha's elemental burst, Kazuha Slash, seriously, that's what they translated it to, unleashes an animo attack and then generates a field that will pulse 5 times over 8 seconds with both animo damage and an absorbed element. The last important part of Kazuha's kit is his Ascension 4 passive, which converts a part of his elemental mastery into elemental damage bonus for the element that Kazuha swirls when he triggers a swirl reaction. From these descriptions, you might think that Kazuha seems somewhat of a middle ground between Sucrose and Venti, and you would be correct. Kazuha directly competes with other animo units, so you should evaluate your roster before considering spending your wishes. Kazuha has utility, damage, and mobility. He can group, deal solid damage, and apply elements to enemies in a massive area. As an off-field unit, he triggers more reactions than off-field Sucrose and only slightly less reactions than Venti, so he benefits heavily from elemental mastery, which can also be used to buff his teammates. Because of his flexible kit, Kazuha can fit into a wide variety of teams. His buffing ability can be better than Sucrose's in specific situations, and does not have as many drawbacks as other grouping tools like Sucrose's Burst, which knocks enemies away, or Venti's Burst, which lifts enemies into the air. However, Kazuha suffers from an identity crisis. He has short cooldowns that incentivize him to stay on the field, but the animation times for his plunge attacks and elemental burst are long, cutting out precious time to use units like Xingqiu or Beidou who rely on normal attacks. Kazuha's biggest issue is that he competes with the other top-tier animo units. For example, a well-built C0 Sucrose competes with Kazuha while requiring less investment. Many compositions already use Sucrose or Venti, and substituting Kazuha leads to marginal increases at best or straight downgrades at worst. For example, Kazuha can slightly outperform Sucrose in a Child and Xiangling reaction team comp, but is strictly worse than Venti in a team with Mona and Ganyu. The compositions where Kazuha has the potential to outperform Sucrose generally also require specific setups in order for Kazuha to buff the correct element or elements, which makes it difficult to take full advantage of Kazuha's kit without knowledge of how these setups work. However, this doesn't mean that Kazuha is bad. The fact that Kazuha can be compared to Sucrose and Venti is a compliment to him, as both Sucrose and Venti are incredibly powerful units. Kazuha also has specific tools that enable him to perform extremely well in some instances, such as in the Melt Ganyu team. We'll be discussing some of the neat interactions that Kazuha can utilize to increase his own and his team's damage. Kazuha's burst follows a certain set of rules that you can use to control its infusion. When casting his burst, you can swirl multiple elements, but it will choose which element to infuse based on a certain priority. If multiple elements are present, Pyro will infuse over Hydro, which will infuse over Electro, which will infuse over Cryo. You can utilize this trick to obtain a damage bonus on multiple elements and control the infusion you get from his burst, which our recent video on Kazuha and Ganyu illustrates. However, this can also be a double-edged sword. For example, when using Kazuha in Electro teams that include Bennett, Kazuha Slash will almost always infuse Pyro, which can lead to unwanted overload procs. Kazuha can also support mono-element teams extremely well by boosting all teammates' elemental damage bonuses and by reducing enemies' resistance to the element the team is based on. He can also work well in freeze teams, as it's easier for him to buff both Cryo and Hydro than most other combinations of elements because of the way that freeze works. The Thundering Fury 4-piece set with Overload or Electrocharge teams utilizing his plunge attacks for DPS are still being evaluated by the community, but show promise. Kazuha also has the potential to outperform Sucrose in a multitude of teams where team damage is split among multiple sources of damage, but, as previously mentioned, the rotations required to enable him to buff multiple team members can be quite complex and hard to pull off. Now, we don't have calculations for these quite yet, and it's very early into the theory crafting process, but the wide array of team compositions that Kazuha can enable is very promising. As players and theory crafters get more time on Kazuha, new interactions and teams will be playtested and will influence how well he can be used. If you're looking for constellations on Kazuha, his early ones are actually quite strong. His first constellation allows him to reset the cooldown on his elemental skill after his burst, making him even more fluid to play and increasing his energy generation. His second constellation pushes him far ahead of Sucrose by boosting his and his team's elemental mastery by 200. His third constellation, fourth constellation, and fifth constellation are relatively not as impactful, as they just increase his talent levels and improve his energy economy by a little bit. His sixth constellation allows you to infuse his attacks with Anemo after using his elemental skill or burst, and increases his normal, charged, and plunging attack damage, which significantly improves his ability to play as an on-field DPS with units like Fischl and Xingqiu to maximize his swirls and normal attacks. When should you pull? Kazuha is an extremely fun unit to play. If you enjoy the kits of Xiao, Venti, and Sucrose all mashed up into a single jack-of-all-trades unit, then Kazuha fits the bill. He's fast-paced, and his roles in different teams are diverse because of it. He can also be worth pulling if you're a fan of extremely technical play, as the more technical work that players put into structuring Kazuha's team rotations, the greater his support capability. When shouldn't you pull? It's difficult to recommend pulling for Kazuha if you already own Venti or Sucrose. To be blunt, it's hard to push Venti and Sucrose out of their ideal compositions, and Kazuha's new teams that he can enable might not be at the top of the DPS charts. If you're worried about his power, it's recommended to wait for our theory crafting community to get a better grasp on what his limits are before pulling for him. To recap, here are Kazuha's strengths and weaknesses that we found with our early testing. Kazuha is a very flexible support unit who can supplement your roster well. He's a strong unit that fulfills multiple roles and gives players a lot of room to improve their damage output. Now let's talk about some cons. Kazuha is, unfortunately, an Anemo unit that has utility and buffing capabilities, which pits him against Sucrose, who is a 4-star unit, and Venti, who has stronger grouping. While he is still a strong unit, due to the existence of Sucrose and Venti, he isn't always the best support to bring. Thanks for watching this quick overview of the Kating Main's theory crafting staff's initial thoughts on Kazuha. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments, and we will do our very best to answer.